I don't know about you, but I remember pretty well when I was young, when I was a younger individual, hearing the expression in my youth, ignorance of the law is no excuse. That's not entirely true, but these days we regularly hear for what amounts to a protected class of people that there are things that are not, done by illegal intent, and therefore there's really no problem with the things that we're talking about. Hello, this is the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host. I'm Kurt. Today is the 8th of December of 2020, and it's a Tuesday today. I welcome everybody aboard, whether you're coming on Rumble on the podcast or on YouTube. For some reason, I said Spotify yesterday, which is one of the places where you can get my podcast, but that's not really what I intended to say. The subject of today's little discussion is going to be the idea of illegal intent. And the one thing that I wanted to say, the very first thing that I wanted to say about the idea of illegal intent is that there are times when intent matters and there are times when it doesn't in a legal sense, okay? So I'm not saying that there's absolutely no instance in which illegal intent matters at all when you're talking about things that are of a legal nature. That's not really true. Now, I wanted to point something out, though, and this is sort of what I mean by what I said in my little intro, and it is this. I had a pretty heavy security clearance. For those of you who know anything about military and other government security clearances, I had a top secret sensitive compartment information NATO cryptographic access security clearance. So I was pretty heavily cleared, and I worked in places where I actually used that clearance. And here's the thing about that. Because of my clearance, the potential outcome when I was guilty of what would be considered by many people just to be malfeasance, error, doing things incorrectly, I was subject to some very harsh, very stern punishment as a result of that being the case. And it's important to recognize that this is true. Now, I don't know, particularly considering some things that I've seen and heard recently, whether or not that's a true thing or whether or not that's a fair thing about what would happen to people now who hold similar clearances. I held my clearance from between about 1983 and about 91, and so it could be that that's changed substantially. But I'm just here to tell you that if I had done something like lost a piece of classified information, misplaced a piece of classified information in a place where people could lay their hands on it or whatever, the result of that literally could have gone as far as jail time. Okay, that's literally where we could have gone. Now, to be fair, I was under a different system of justice at the time. People don't, probably lots of them realize that about the military. The military folks are under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or UCMJ. And even the really technically the Constitution doesn't apply to them because they're people in special circumstances, right? So that's pretty important to realize and to consider. But that even with that having been said, the point is there are some pretty strong penalties for mishandling of certain kinds of information in the government. And one of the things that I've heard in the recent voting situation brings all of this sort of thing to mind too, because there are some strong penalties there too. And I've heard people say, but there wasn't illegal intent. And I also heard people talking about investigations performed by intelligence agencies in the United States and that there wasn't illegal intent in those either. Look, there doesn't have to be illegal intent for something to be illegal. This is the very first thing that you need to understand, regardless whether you're talking about somebody who's subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice or just subject to the laws, rules, and regulations of the United States. There is nothing that says that that person has to intend to do something illegal to do something illegal. You didn't intend to run that red light, but you did, right? And when you did, maybe the punishment is different. Maybe what they do is let you off with a warning instead of actually give you the ticket or whatever. Or maybe they don't. Maybe that's not what happens. They give you the ticket. And they're perfectly within their rights to give you the ticket. There are times when the things that you do, what you did, it matters whether or not you had intent. So if you accidentally discharged a firearm and it killed somebody, then you might be guilty of manslaughter, but if you intentionally took aim at somebody and fired a shot, then now you're potentially guilty of murder in the first degree if it's with malice aforethought. If you intended essentially to do that and you did it by that intent. So the point is that even if you didn't intend to kill somebody when you fired off that round, even if you were taking pot shots in the backyard and somebody walked across your backyard somehow, out on the street or whatever, and got hit by something that you did and were killed or injured, that doesn't mean that you're not guilty of a crime. It's not what that means. So the idea that, say, for example, the director of the CIA, this is a perfectly good example, and I'm not naming names, and I'm not talking about any particular director, and I'm not talking about any particular situation, though there are things that come to mind when I say this. When that person says, but they didn't intend anything criminal, my answer is, it doesn't matter necessarily whether they intended something criminal. What matters is, was what they did criminal in nature? And then the question is there a consideration of intent in the crime? And if there is, guess what? If intent was required for the thing to be criminal, then the thing that they're doing is not criminal in nature. On the other hand, if intent is not specified, the chances are pretty good it really doesn't matter what their intent was. So the concept of legal intent only really matters if intent is in consideration in the crime. And typically it's just a more serious crime if intent is involved, and then there's a less serious crime if intent is not involved. So when somebody says, oh, yeah, we did an investigation and there were things that happened that were wrong in the investigation, that were malfeasance or whatever in the investigation, but, there was no criminal intent in what was done in that investigation, my answer to that individual is, I don't really care. Forgive me, I don't really care. Unless you can tell me that the laws covering how that investigation was to be done and the illegality of things that occurred during that investigation require criminal intent, I do not care whether or not what you did, entailed or encompassed something that was done with illegal intent. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You're still potentially guilty, not just of malfeasance, but criminal activity as a result. So again, let's be clear on something. What I'm not saying is that there's no situation where intent is important, right? Like I say, if you talk about the idea of somebody dying, you might talk about somebody who was angry in the spur of the moment, killed that person, and might be responsible for manslaughter. On the other hand, you might talk about somebody who decides that they want the insurance money that will come to them if somebody dies, right? And they carefully plan out a series of events that they know will result in the death of that individual, and particularly if they actually take that individual's that individual's life. And if they do, at that point, they are potentially guilty of murder in the first degree, right? Because they planned a murder, executed the murder that they planned, and that was the result. On the other hand, if a person, like I say, is taking pot shots in their backyard or out in the deer woods or whatever, and they happen to hit somebody and there was absolutely no intent where that's concerned, that individual may be guilty of manslaughter. They may be guilty of something less, illegal discharge of a firearm or any number of other things, right? It just depends on what they intended to do, what they were trying to do. So in that sense, intent matters. But when you say, oh, they had no illegal intent, my answer is that doesn't mean no crime occurred. It just means that the crime that occurred was a lesser crime. And the thing is, if you can prove intent, guess what? It doesn't matter that somebody says that no intent occurred. Intent is not something that's proven on an executive basis, typically. Intent is something that's proven in a court of law. So saying there was or wasn't intent may apply to what charge is put forth, but it doesn't really apply to anything before that time, except that people can say, I believe that this person had this intent or that intent. Okay, I need to wrap up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Again, welcome aboard for anybody who's on Rumble, the podcast, or YouTube. Glad to have you aboard today. I'm going to try and put out another Daily Summation tomorrow. That would be Wednesday, December the 9th of 2020. And hopefully we will see you again then. If we don't, we don't. I know how that is. People have busy lives and they're doing their thing. I hope everything's going well for you today. And again, hopefully we will see you again tomorrow. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This video was recorded on Tuesday, the 8th of December of 2020. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I hope you found it entertaining or instructional, or maybe both. If you want to see more from me, you can go to blogs.kpschubert.com. That's blogs.kpschubert.com. I am on Twitter, Parler, and Minds.com. My handle on each of those is @kpschubert. That's @kpschubert. I have a Rumble and a YouTube channel. They are the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble and YouTube. I have a Facebook page. The Facebook page is Kurt's Religion and Politics as well. I am on Patreon. If you want to support me, that's one of the better places you can do that. And you will find me at Kurt's Religion and Politics on Patreon. I have a podcast. The podcast is podcasts with an S. .kpschubert.com. That's podcasts.kpschubert.com. I think you should be able to find me with relative ease on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify as well. The best way I find to do that is to look for Kurt's Religion and Politics. You can try to use the Daily Summation. I find that it doesn't work as well as a general rule, but you can always try that. I'm glad to have you aboard today, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow.